Hi, I'm Joe Paiva from GeoLearn, and this is my top 10 tips for the licensing exam. This is a set of tips on how to take the exam and also how to prepare for it. This replaces a video I created several years ago, so this is the December 2018 version, and I'm doing this because in the last year to year and a half, there have been some changes in how NCES administers the fundamentals of surveying and principles and practice of surveying exam. They are now delivered through computer-based testing, CBT for short, and so what happens is you go to a Pearson VUE testing center, you sit at a computer, and you take the exam where the questions come up on screen, you click on the appropriate answer, and you move on. So this is a little bit different. They are also both now closed book exams, so I wanted to just try and reflect some of that. As far as the state-specific exam is concerned, they are still across the jurisdictions 2 hours long, although there are some exceptions. And these vary. As far as I know, none of them are using computer-based testing, but they could be the bubble sheets where you fill in a square or a circle or something like that to select your response. And some of them may have portions or maybe entirely longhand where they're graded by an individual, the same way your exams might be graded by an instructor. So my 10th tip, starting from the bottom and working up, is this one here: when possible, attend an exam review course. So an exam review course is one of the best ways to do some preparation if you've never taken the exam before, to help improve your chances of passing. It helps to get others' point of view on topics, both from the other attendees as well as the instructor or instructors for the course. And you'll hear many exam prep and exam day anecdotes which can be useful, because the more you know what to expect, the better off you're going to be. It also helps to instill some discipline, especially if you take this maybe a year before you're thinking about taking the exam, to think about the things you need to prepare and study for and set up a study schedule. Number 9 is pre-calculate your time budget. One of the things that happens with a lot of people who take the licensing exams is that it's been a while since they've taken the exam, and this is often kind of a stressful time because there's a lot based on you passing the exam. So I suggest that you actually figure out about how many minutes you have to spend on each question on the average, and then spread it out over the time and actually have a way of then checking your progress as you go along. The FS exam currently has 110 questions. The PS exam is 100 questions. And if you look at the time breakdown, basically the actual time you have to take the exams are 5 hours and 20 minutes for the FS and 6 hours for the PS. So basically around 3 minutes or a little bit less. You do get time for other things, but you're not allowed to answer the exam at that time for administrative matters, and both exams have a budgeted break. These breaks are optional. You don't have to take them. I strongly recommend you do take them, but you can't use all that time for the exam. You know specifically how much time must be spent in answering the exam and how much time is allotted for other things. The bottom line is that when you take the PS exam, you really need to plan on spending a whole day there, because it's about a 7-hour time span. Time management, this means, this is just continuing with that tip, you know in advance how many questions you'll have, so calculate your time and periodically evaluate your time to finish status during the exam. Also know when to say, I'm not making headway with this question. Maybe I'm just having a mental block, and you come back. You get no credit for answering the questions in order. You also, while you are on this topic, need to learn about AITs. Most people think that the questions are going to be just multiple choice. So AIT is an NCEES term that stands for alternative item type. So in addition to multiple choice, you can have other things where you have more than one answer that might be the appropriate response. You might have point and click. So you might have a situation or a piece of equipment where you need to look at the piece of equipment and identify something that is asked for in the exam. You might have drag and drop where you need to maybe arrange things in the order that you might do something, or you might, there might be words or there might be pictures that you need to drag into a certain sequence. For example, how you level up a total station or something like that. And finally, they can even have fill in the blank, which means you have to enter a response to the question in the space provided. There's a little bit of latitude in what you enter, but things like spelling and grammar could be important, so be aware that those types can also now show up. Number 8, verify your answers. So if you have a bubble sheet like I pictured here, one of the things you need to do is first make sure you're correctly shading in the bubble entirely. Don't check it. Don't partially make a few scratches. You need to make sure you filled in the bubble entirely. Another part of the bubble sheet process is that it's very easy as you go through the exam to start marking the correct bubble, but for the wrong question because you have lost the sequence somehow. And I tell people, circle the answer you come up with for question 19 or whatever it is, so that when you do a check periodically, you come back and see if you actually have filled in correctly. On your computer-based exam, the exam interface will show you which questions you've answered and which ones you need to work on, so you can go back and verify that you clicked on the response that you intended. And later on, I'll actually show you some of the other aids that are useful that you can find on the NCES YouTube channel. In either case, whether it's bubble sheet or CBT, remember you get 0 for any unanswered question. So answer all the questions, even if you have no clue. It may be that of the 4 responses, you can at least eliminate 1, and sometimes you can eliminate 2 as being obviously incorrect or too far out of the range of might be the appropriate response. So in those cases, then you make a guess, and at least you've improved your chances of getting a correct answer. The NCES YouTube channel is your friend. So here's the URL to it. We'll go look at it here after I've gone through my entire list of tips. But I just want to point out that there is a fair amount of information on the NCES YouTube channel, and you are only hurting yourself if you don't take the time to go look at those videos that tell you a lot about your exam day experience. So this is just a still picture here. This is a screen capture, but I just wanted to point out it talks about the Pearson VUE exam day experience. So this tells you a little bit about how you even need to dress. For example, you cannot wear hats or caps. They have information about whether you can bring in water bottles. They have information on what else you can bring in with you, because there's basically a locker you were given that you would need to put all your personal items in, except for the things that you're allowed to have there. They tell you how to search the on-screen NCES reference handbook. If you go to the NCES site, you'll find out what equations and other things you'll be given to access, because remember, these are closed book exams, but they do give you a certain number of things on these reference handbooks. So it tells you how to research the on-screen reference handbook, because even if you've downloaded and printed off the on-screen handbook at home as part of your study process, you are not allowed to bring that into the exam. You are also not allowed to bring any scratch paper in, but you get a marker and these plasticized sheets of paper in which you write your scratch work that you might need to do. And as I mentioned earlier, for verifying things, talks about how to flag items for review, either because you need to come back and check the answer because you're really not sure about it, or how to find the ones you haven't answered that you need to go back and check. And of course, you can always go back and check the ones you have answered just to verify that you answered them correctly. You need to add a picture ID to your exam checklist. So there's actually 2 tips in a sense, because it really is a good idea to have a checklist that you actually placing items on so that you can check them before you leave home or wherever you're going from to take the exam. But a picture ID is important now. A lot of people say, well, it's always in my pocket, always in my wallet, always in my whatever. But it's it's always the case that this happens, that you had to pull out your ID because you just took a flight, or you had to pull it out for some other reason. The ID went back in a different place and it's not on your person when you show up to take the exam. And the downside to that is if you don't have picture ID, no exam. They need to be official IDs, so you need to figure out how to make sure it comes to the exam with you. Something else is to figure out the logistics, the physical logistics of getting yourself there. I tell people, once you know when you're going to take the exam, try to figure out the traffic patterns from where you're going to be coming to take the exam and drive it at the same time, just to see what's going on. It could be that there's construction, you're taking the exam next week, there's construction this week, so probably there's going to be construction next week. So you need to kind of research that, figure out where you're going to park. And I tell people, if you live in a dense urban area, sometimes it's maybe worthwhile staying at a nearby hotel and walking over, or have someone drive you there so you don't have to spend a lot of time looking for parking, or use taxi or some other type of public transportation. These exams take a while, and of course you get a break, and it's a good idea to bring meals or snacks rather than plan on going somewhere, because you don't have that much time to go out and get food. Snacks are definitely recommended, and especially for the longer exam, bring a light lunch, because keeping your energy level up is an important part of being able to pass the exam. Your library. So for the PS and the FS, you're not allowed to bring any reference books in with you. But you need to have a good set of reference books to start the studying process, to be able to look things up. So I tell people, acquire a good library of books. You may not necessarily have all these books at the time you take the exam, but you need to work on if you're going to be a professional, to have a professional library. On the other hand, many state-specific exams do allow you to bring in books and other reference material, usually only if they're bound, although 3-ring binders usually count as being bound material, as long as you don't have any loose sheets that have occurred from the holes ripping out. So you need to very carefully read what you're allowed to bring and figure this out. As far as the professional library is concerned, for your studying process, I suggest you should have the definitions of surveying and associated terms. If you go to something like the state-specific exam and you're allowed to have books with you, I would definitely bring that in. I would bring in Black's Law Dictionary. It can either be the very large Black's Law Dictionary, or what's called the pocket edition, a general text on surveying. So this can be something like Wolf and Gilani or Basler and Moffett, general surveying text, and then either Brown's Boundary Control and Legal Principles, or Evidence and Procedures for Boundary Location. Either one of those will probably work. Try to get the most current edition possible, but don't go out and buy one if you have one that's just 1 or 2 editions older. Couple of other things, Wattles writing legal descriptions. And then in your state, for the state-specific exam, if there are compendiums or notebooks or something prepared by your state association of the licensing board or some other authority on the state law that affects the practice of land surveying and all the regulations that the licensing board usually has to comply with, sometimes you can buy those, sometimes you may have to create those. And as I said, if you're allowed to bring them in as a reference to the exam, That's great. It needs to be 3-hole punched and bound properly. Now I have all these suggestions, but don't just get them, read them cover to cover. Now you may be at a place where you cannot understand a certain percentage of certain material. For example, the section on geodesy in the general surveying textbook. That's fine, but at least read them over so that you see what some of the terms are that are used, because on the exam you will only use, or you will only see terms that are used in a textbook. So you won't see a total station referred to as a gun, for example, and we'll be making observations, not taking shots or shooting something and so forth. So get used to the way textbooks describe surveying procedures. The calculator is a really important part. You need to look up and get and learn to use the approved calculator that you prefer. NCES has on their website a listing of the calculator models, and they're very specific. So the exam proctors will look at your calculator, and if it's not the right type, close enough isn't good enough. If it isn't the right type, they will not allow you to take it in. You also need things like spare calculator or spare battery, because if it's rechargeable, you won't have time to recharge it. But know how to use it. You're not allowed to take the instruction manual in, because that would be considered a prohibited material to take into a closed book exam. Now keep in mind on the NCES part that you will have an additional calculator that you can use as your primary or backup. But in November of every year, NCES will update, if any updating is required, on the models of calculators and brand names that are permitted. And this is what the proctors would look at. So be sure that you've done that for the particular year that you're taking the exam. On the CBT exams, you also get an on-screen calculator, and I think most of you are familiar with what that looks like, because you may have one either from your operating system or maybe a third-party app. And it can be your primary or backup calculator based on how comfortable you are with using that type of technology. Number 2 is exam prep materials. So this is all kinds of things. I've already talked about some, but these are very specific, and this is where we'll go through the website, a couple of websites that I'm going to show you. But remember that NCES publishes materials like typical questions for the FS and PS exam, and I think it's well worth the investment to go in and do that. Other authors publish exam prep materials. Unfortunately, a lot of those books were written when the PS exam was open book, and so you may have to, they're still good questions, so you may have to keep that in mind as you look at the questions and try to figure out if a particular question in a review manual or typical questions manual written by someone other than NCES would be applicable to your exam question. If you take a sample text at home, but do it under the similar conditions as the exam, meaning timing, make sure it's closed book if it's closed book, using the same calculator and so forth. And even if the typical exam or the test exam or the practice exam is only 25 questions, make sure that you're not exceeding 75 or so minutes to take it using the same kind of timing that NCES imposes on you when you're taking the real exam. And then finally, I say read. So one of the biggest pieces of feedback that I get from people from the exam prep courses that I teach, because I cover this kind of material a lot with people who are getting ready to take the exam, I ask them to write back to me and tell me about their exam experiences. And one of the most common piece of feedback that I get is, I didn't know. I didn't know that this was going to happen. I didn't know I needed to know that. I didn't know I needed to show up 30 minutes before the exam starts or an hour before the exam starts to be at the exam site. I didn't know about my picture ID. There's all kinds of things. Or I showed up and I didn't have my paperwork that told me I could take the exam because there was some kind of mix-up and they didn't have my name on the list. So all these kinds of things can happen. So I tell people, make sure you practically memorized everything having to do with the exam at ncws.org, your licensing board's website. If they send you documents by email or US mail, make sure you read them all. If they send you emails, I would recommend you print them off and keep them in a binder. Sometimes your state surveyors association publishes material that you find useful. It might be the code of ethics, it might be other things that might be something that you need to refer to or at least study up on to prepare for the exam. And then in some states, there's still yet another party because some states will hire a third party who will be the administrator or proctor of the exam. And so the website of that third party, and you'll be told about it by the state licensing board, that information will be given to you and you should go read their website material as well. What you don't want is to find out about something you didn't know because you show up at the exam and you're sitting there feeling a little out of the loop. That's one of the worst ways to put you in a psychological state that makes it harder for you to do well on your exam. Just another sub-tip to go with this, start a clear exam envelope. So get a plastic envelope that's clear and put all your correspondence in there. If you get any letters admitting you to the exam, put those in there. Make sure these are the originals. You need to know the address of your exam location. Your Pearson View Center is obviously different from where you would go to take your state-specific licensing exam. So make sure you have both of them and you have the address. If you need driving instructions, if you need maps, make sure that all those things are there. I wouldn't necessarily put your ID in there because it probably usually stays on your person, but at least make a checklist, and you could make that. If it's a clear envelope, you could actually put it where it's the last item in your envelope, but facing outward, so without even opening the envelope and pulling out the sheet, you can read your checklist and make sure that you have everything. So good luck with all of this. Keep calm, and hopefully you'll be a licensed professional and recognize that having the license now means that you now have a new set of responsibilities. So before I get to my last slide, what I want to do is just go to my web browser and talk about the NCES website first. So the NCES website, if you look at it, you just scroll down and you'll see a couple of things that you need to go check out. The first one in orange over here is the exam prep materials. So make sure you click on that and check out all the options, and we'll look at a couple of them. And then here you can select your exam, and you see here, because we selected surveyor, that the only choices are the FS exam and PS exam. So depending on what you're going to do, you need to go check those. So what I've done here is I've gone ahead and I'm going to select the FS exam. And when I select the FS exam and go into what the site shows you, once you click on that, is they explain 110 question test, non-disclosure agreement. You're supposed to sign it or click it electronically. Takes 2 minutes. There's a tutorial on how to use the system that lasts about 8 minutes. And then the exam itself takes 5 hours and 20 minutes. But you're allowed to take a scheduled break. In other words, at a specific time, you're allowed to take a break for 25 minutes. So there's other things in here, but that you should read, including the fees, more about AITs, and so forth. And then the reference materials. I recommend that you download the FS reference handbook and also the PS reference handbook, depending on which exam you're going to take, and that you have that as part of your study binder. Like I said, you can't take it into the exam, the FS and PS exam, because they will be provided to you electronically. And so this is a similar page for the PS exam that I've just brought up here on the screen that you can take a look at. And this is the actual active website. So keep in mind, if you're seeing this sometime after when I have recorded this course, that the page may actually look a little bit different. Now let me move on to the next tab on my browser here. And this is the exam prep materials. Remember the orange on the very first. So there are several things in here that you should be aware of. First of all, there's actually a video that comes from the NCES YouTube channel that actually walks you through a computer-based testing demo so you can see how it works. If I recall correctly, it's set up for the PE exam, but it's going to be very similar for anything relating to surveying. And there's other videos in here. So now let me go to the NCES YouTube channel. So if you go to YouTube and you type in NCES and you do a search, you get to NCES Media. So when you click on that, you get to this page that I already had before as a screen capture, but I just want to point out some of the things that are in here. One of the best ways to get to what you need is click on the playlists and go to Exploring Computer-Based Testing, which is the first playlist. Most of the other things, they're interesting, but not as important for your preparation. So if you click on this, I have the sound turned off so it won't interrupt me. You'll see the list of the 8 videos that you can look at. Actually playing the first one right now, which is the Pearson VUE Exam Day Experience. And that's a really important one for you to have seen. But here's the video. It's only 30 seconds long on how to search the on-screen reference handbook. The next one talks about the Pearson VUE reusable booklet. Another one talks about how to flag your items for review. Talks about how to use the on-screen calculator for computer-based exams. Talks about the hotkeys, which is something I haven't talked about, but there are hotkeys to do some of these things better. They even have a short video on managing your time on exam day and alternative exam types. So be aware of all of these things and make sure you have checked all these out, because as I said, the worst kind of question in an exam review class is the question that's never asked. And similarly, the worst kind of experience that can happen when you take the exam is that you show up at the exam and you realize that you didn't do all your research. So my final slide here, I hope you enjoyed this, is that if you're watching this on YouTube, realize that you can register or log in at www.geo-learn.com. Don't forget the dash. And if you go to the free courses section, you can then download the PDF of these slides if you think these slides might be useful to you. That's the reason why we're putting it there, so that even if you've taken the course already, you don't have to take the course again. As soon as you click on the free course and you go into the system that delivers the course to you, you'll see a message that tells you you can download the PDF of what I've just presented. So with that, I will say again, good luck and goodbye, and thanks for listening.